Okay, so yesterday we talked about who? Joseph. Joseph. And there was none like him who had the Spirit of God. So this week we're talking about 4 men who in the Old Testament record, somebody says about them, there's nobody like this fella. There is nobody. Something about them was unique. And we said that they were influential not only in their own time, but even all the way thousands of years later, they're still influential in this world because of these characteristics that they had. Now of Moses it said, since that time no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. There's something about Moses that is unique. And here in Deuteronomy it says that he is a prophet and nobody was like him. And there was something about his relationship with God that made him unique. So, let's talk about Moses for a few minutes. If you think of the life of Moses, you can divide it up into 3 40-year periods. Where was he the first 40 years? Egypt. He was in Egypt. And he was kind of a somebody. Would you agree with that? I mean, it starts from the very beginning. It says he was a very beautiful baby. I mean, he had it going on from the cradle. So if Moses was the most beautiful baby in the Bible, do you know who the ugliest baby in the Bible was? I've always thought it was Theophilus because his daddy looked at him and said, that's the Theophilus thing I've ever seen in my life. They wouldn't let me tell that in the dramatization, so I had to tell somebody. So, you get it. He was a beautiful baby. And he was born under an edict. What was that edict from Pharaoh? Kill the babies. Kill the babies. Quite an evil plan. But sometimes when people come up with evil plans, when rulers come up with evil plans, God's got a plan too. God's got a plan too. And his is always bigger and better. So Moses is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And he grows up pretty much in the palace. I mean, he's weaned by his birth mom, but he grows up in the palace. It says he was trained in all the wisdom of Egypt. Again, the most powerful nation in the world, kind of like the America of that day, right? They kind of ran things in their neck of the woods. And he was trained, and it also says he was mighty in word and deed. So not just smart, but he was active. Probably trained as a military leader. Probably trained as an organizer of the workforces and a planner, and so pretty sharp fella. In fact, he was being prepped to be a what? I think he was prepped to being a Pharaoh. I think he was being prepped to be a Pharaoh. I'm going to throw this out there as I think. Whenever the firstborn died, later in the story, somebody doesn't die. Somebody doesn't mark their lintels with blood and they don't die. And that's Pharaoh. Which tells you Pharaoh is not what? He's not the firstborn. Who do you think is the firstborn of that family? I think it's Moses. I think it's Moses. There's a lot of archaeology that's been done to kind of show, the succession of rulers, and around the time that Moses would have been, his story would have taken place. You see the kind of the family tree from the records there in Egypt, and it looks like his mother was Hashpetet. It's hard to say. Hashpetet. And the thing that's unique about her images among all the hieroglyphics and etchings is it's always defaced. Now, why would Moses' mother be defaced? Not a good story for the Egyptians, right? We don't want to talk about that line of the family. At some point, Moses is either half-brother or cousin, right? So the same generation, either his half-brother or his cousin, becomes the ruler. But he's not the oldest. We know he's not the oldest because he doesn't die in the Passover. And it looks like Moses. So put yourself in Pharaoh's shoes for a moment. The rightful heir to the throne is standing before you in a shepherd's robe telling you, let my people go. Would that harden your heart a little bit? If you were the king and the rightful king is giving you some instructions, right? Kind of schooling you. So he's raised up in all this wisdom. And we learn something from Acts chapter 7 about an event that takes place which kind of changes everything. Moses sees a couple of fellas fighting, an Egyptian and a Israelite. The Egyptian they're not actually fighting, the Egyptian is banging on him, getting on to him. What does Moses do? Killed him. Now Stephen says in Acts 7, what was going on in Moses' head is he's thinking, now's the time. Now's the time to free my people. The Hebrew letter said he was willing to give up all the benefits of living in Pharaoh's household to be called an Israelite and to suffer with the Israelites. And he's about how old at this time? We said it was 40-year period, so he's around 40. And he's thinking they're going to follow him, right? The revolution starts today. But what happens?
Well, the man that he kind of stepped in for said, what are you, a ruler over us?
Yeah.
He resented
Who are you? Yeah, who are you? Right. Go back to your little palace, little Pharaoh boy, Pharaoh Jr. Leave us alone. So he had killed an Egyptian. He decides that is probably not a good thing in Pharaoh's eyes. And so, where does he go?
Midian.
He goes to Midian. So for 40 years, he was a somebody in the greatest nation, right? Big fish in a big pond. And now he's going to spend 40 years as a nobody. As a nobody. Who was, it wasn't Israel that was following him around in Midian. Who was it? Sheep. He became a shepherd, right? Married a gal and had a couple of kids and raising sheep. And then something happens that really changes his life. What's that? Burning bush. So, at about 80, most of us are looking at our 401k, right? We're thinking, I need to retire. I need to stop working so hard. Did y'all get some papers? Did y'all get a paper? All right. Need a pen? Okay. So at age 80, after having been 40 years of somebody and 40 years of nobody, he's thinking, we're pretty much done, right? 80? And what does God tell him? Time to start. Right? It's not time to stop. It is time to start. Now, what has God been doing with this fella for 80 years? I think he's been preparing him. Right? We talked about yesterday God's creative modus operandi is to form something and then to fill it up, right? So he's been filling this fella up with, what do you think he's been filling this fella up with for the second 40 years? A lot of patience if he's a shepherd. Sheep can be pretty stubborn, unruly, kind of spacey. Yeah, yeah, kind of spacey and just wander off. Yeah, and he's got to be the guy to corral them, to take care of them. So so God is preparing him. And then what's Moses' response to this plan that God has for him? Yeah, his first response is, who, me? I am not your man. I am not the right guy. You need to find somebody else. And what's his second response? I don't have the equipment. Yeah, I can't do this. I don't talk well. Which is interesting because Stephen said he was mighty in words and deeds, right?
Yeah.
But I think having, if the only people you can talk to for 40 years is sheep, you may lose a little bit. You may lose a little bit. And there's a third thing that he says. First of all, I'm not the right guy. Second of all, I don't have the equipment to do this. What's the third one?
Speech impediment.
Well, that's kind of part of that equipment, that ability to speak. I don't speak well. He points at somebody else. He says, they're not going to listen to me. Why would they believe me? Why would they think that, look at my clothes, look at the way I smell, right? Why would they believe me? And all of these, God answers. I'm reminded of the fact that the men who eventually became the apostles had one qualification that they filled. A lot of them were, men of the earth, men of the sea, tax collector. But what one qualification did they all have to be apostles of Jesus? Faith to do what?
Leave and go.
When Jesus said, "Follow me," they got up and followed him. I think that's an important lesson for every generation. The way I put it to people that used to work for me at AT&T is 80% of success is showing up. Right? When somebody says, let's get something done, if you're one of the ones that raise your hand and says, here am I, send me. Moses and the apostles and people like Isaiah are good examples. Just making yourself. God didn't ask Moses to be awesome. He asked him to be available. And finally, Moses says, okay, okay, I'll go. And so he goes back to Egypt. And at first, people aren't really sure, where'd you come? Last time they saw this guy was a generation or two ago and 40 years ago. And all of a sudden he shows up and says, oh, by the way, we're leaving. And these people they're slaves, right? They're kind of under the gun. And they're not really sure that this is real. And what does God God gives Moses two things to help him out in this work. What's the first thing?
His name.
Keep going.
The
God's name. You mean God's?
name,
Yeah.
right. I am.
He gives them God's name. Tell them that what? I am sent you. What does it mean to know somebody's name? There's people here today, I don't know your name. There's other people here that I do know your name. What does it mean to know somebody's name? Yeah, there's a relationship there. Right? So that God giving him his name is a significant thing. Later on in the story, God will not just tell him his name, he'll show him his glory. Moses gets to see God's glory. And part of that glory, I think the most significant part of that glory, is God calling out his name. Jehovah. He says it multiple times, and he says, I am compassionate, I'm kind, I bless, I'm full of grace. He's letting Moses into his inner circle, as it were. And we see in this quote, whom the Lord knew face to face. Whom the Lord knew face to face. What does that tell? What does that say to you?
Very deep relationship.
An intimate relationship, close relationship, not just, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine, okay. Yeah. Right? It's spending time together. And when you spend time with God, what tends to happen to you? You start taking on the characteristics of Jehovah. You're not deity, but those adjectives about Jehovah that we all know, you start to take some of those on. You can't help but. Everybody who came into contact, who encountered Jesus on his walk, were changed in some way. And it was changed for the better whenever they got up and followed and did what Jesus said. So, that's one thing. He gave him his name. What's something else? We're now up to three things because I forgot that one.
The rod.
He gave him he already had a staff, but what did he put in that staff? Some power, right? Some power. We're talking about a stick now, right? Later on, he'll change the world with a little rock, and a bunch of years later, somebody will hold up a penny, and Jesus says, that's bigger than anybody else has put into the collection. God can do amazing things with just the everyday, ordinary things that are in our hands. But what do we have to do first? Yeah, and pick them up, so you utilize them. But who is actually doing something with that stick and that rock and that penny? Yeah, isn't it God? God, he's the one who has endowed those things with that power, and he's the one. But he partners with us in that. He partners with people in changing the world. That's just part of making myself available. It's not just me, it's my stuff. My stuff. And what we tend to do is, I'm going to speak for me now. I don't know if you do it or not. Here's what I tend to do. Yeah, I'll give myself to the Lord, but my stuff, that's how I live. That's how I survive. My house, my car, just the common things around. I need to hold on to those, God. I don't need to give those up. My bank account, my stuff. Can I hold on to that? There's a man who found a pearl. And what did he do? Sold everything he had so he could get hold of that pearl. We got to be all in. We can't be like the 5 foolish virgins who just brought some of their stuff, some of their oil. We got to be all in. You got it? Bring it. You got it? Bring it. So, Moses, he had a stick. That's humble. Right? That's a humble lifestyle. Here, what do you got, Moses? Oh, I got a stick. Oh, okay, let's use that. And what does God do through Moses there in Egypt? There's 10 of them. He brings plagues. He brings plagues upon the Egyptians because he keeps telling Pharaoh, let my people go. Let's go. We're going to need to go out into the wilderness to worship. And Pharaoh at first just keeps saying, nope, nope, nope. Then he starts saying, yeah, you can go, but not your animals. He said, oh, no, we need our animals because we're going to worship out there and we got to sacrifice them. But yeah, okay, well, just, maybe you can go just a little bit, So there was this kind of dance going on, and Pharaoh either said no or would go back on his word. Yeah, you can go. Then he would change his mind and say, no, I changed my mind. We can't let you go. Why wouldn't Pharaoh let these people go? Remember, the Pharaohs are afraid of the Israelites. It'd be good to get them out. Why couldn't they let them go? doing all the work. I think it's the same reason a lot of people in the United States had a problem with emancipating the slaves. They're our workforce. We can't give that up. God said, Moses, keep going, keep going. And that final plague is what? Death of the firstborn. And what keeps the Israelites from suffering under that?
Passover.
Right. They sacrificed a lamb, put the blood over the lintel.
A perfect lamb of the first year.
Yeah, the best and brightest lamb. The best lamb you got. In those days, the houses that they lived in, probably especially as slave people, they excavated and archaeologized. Is that a word?
You just used it.
I did. Kay Shirtliff would have a fit. They've dug up places that people live, the common people lived. And there's one part of the house that remains. Most of it was made out of what, do you think? Mud. Mud tends not to last too many big, strong storms and just wind. It just falls apart. But there was one piece of the house that was sturdy and strong. What do you think that was? Front door. Made of stone. Front door is made of stone. And what they found was that on that piece that goes vertical above the door, what do you think was on that? No, before the blood stain. The archaeologists have found something written about on these door. Would that be the lintel? The name of the family name. Go down over here to Hyksos Drive and take a left on Ramses and look for the Moses family. It'll be above the door. Right? They put their family name there. So my name's on the doorpost, and God says, you cover that with blood. The blood of a perfect lamb. And when death comes to Egypt, it will do what? It will pass over your house. It will skip you. It will pass over. I want you to turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Terry, could you read 24 through 27? Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 27.
By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
Keep going.
By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them.
That's what I was looking for. By faith, he kept the Passover. So you see several different verbs there. First of all, he refused. What did he refuse?
Wealth.
Yeah, the pleasures of sin in Pharaoh's household. Then he chose. What did he choose? Affliction for the people. And then it says he regarded, yours may say esteemed. What did he regard or esteem? Say again?
Disgrace.
Disgrace of what? Of who? Huh? Christ. Right? The disgrace of Christ. How does Moses How does Moses know anything about the disgrace of Christ? You ever wondered that? That's a long, was that about 1,000 years later? How does,
Well, Jesus was from in the beginning.
see, I think these folks knew a lot more about Messiah than we give them credit for. And I think they understood that although blessings came with it, tough times would come with it as well. And Moses, it seems here what the Hebrew writer is telling us, is that Moses wanted to be a part of that story. And that's why he was willing to give up, to refuse the pleasures of sin for a season, to be identified with the Israelites, because he knew that the Israelite story was the story, right? That's the story. The lineage of Christ, that's the story. And then we get to Christ himself, and Christ now becomes, the seed of Abraham now becomes the story. But the family, that nation of Abraham, he knows that's the story of history. That's the point of all of this, is to get us through the Israelites to Christ. He says, I want to be a part of that story. I want to be an Israelite. And if they're suffering today, that's where I stand. If they're blessed today, I'll stand there too. If they're on the road, I'm on the road. If they're resting, I'll rest with them. But I want to be a part of that story. No matter where that story, valley, mountain, wherever they are, I want to be a part of that group. So he regarded and esteemed. By the way, that regarded and esteemed, that's a leadership word. You're putting something primary in your mind. You're putting something primary in your mind and saying, I'm going to lead my mind. I'm going to control my thought processes and just how my mental state works by putting this one thing first. And what he put first was Christ, was Messiah. Okay? And then it says he left Egypt. That's another verb. And then he persevered. That last one, kept. He kept the Passover. That's actually another leadership word. So it's doing something, but it's doing something in a leadership capacity. Moses went around to people saying, I could just see him all day that day walking around to all these different houses going, where's your blood? Come on, guys, come on, let's go. Get this done. He's doing something. He kept the Passover. He was true to the call, right? But he's doing it in a leadership role. So Pharaoh finally lets the people go. But then what does he do? What does Pharaoh do? Changed my mind. I shouldn't have done that. That was a bad idea. It was just a bad idea. You ever decided to do something and once the train starts going down the track, you're going, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Let me go undo that. And the Israelites find themselves between a rock and a hard place. What's behind them? Yeah. The whole Egyptian army. And what's in front of them? Body of water, right? A body of water. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And what do they start doing? This is like one of those first of many different instances of the Israelites doing something. Murmur. You know, I was reading last week a psalm, and David cries out to the Lord a lot. And in that psalm, I forget which one it is, but in that psalm he says, I murmur to you. And the first, my head's spinning. Wait a minute. Why was God so upset at the Israelites murmuring and yet David gets away with it? Why does David get away with it? What's the difference between David's murmuring and the Israelites murmuring, do you think?
They were murmuring against.
They were complaining about God. You let us out here to die, did you? Yeah. At least we were, we might have been dogs, but better a living dog than a live lion, than a dead lion. Better a living dog than a dead lion, kind of an attitude. And what's Moses' response to them? And it winds up being the response they need to hear every time.
Stand still and see the power of God.
Keep calm and let God fight a battle for you, right? And that's over and over and over and over that this occurs. Again, how old is Moses about this time? 80. And he's telling the people, keep calm. Something's going to happen. God has said we're going somewhere, and we're going to go there. Kind of reminds me of Jesus on the Sea of Galilee. Let's go over to the other side, and a storm comes up, and the disciples get all, oh! He says, take a chill pill. And then at the end of it, after he calms the sea, what does he tell them? Oh, ye of little faith. Faith comes by hearing the word of God, right? So what word had they heard before they even got in the boat? We're going to the other side. We're going to the other side. Do you believe Jesus or not? Even just an ordinary thing like that. Do you believe him or not? Are we really going? Is there going to be a storm? Is there going to be a sea in your way? Is there going to be some kind of obstacle? Well, do you believe Jesus or not? That's kind of the question. Do you believe God when he says we're going to Canaan, or don't you? Sea, storm? Believe what God has said is going to happen. So they cross the sea like it's dry land. God causes the wind, and the Egyptian army is destroyed. By faith, the Israelites crossed. By opinion, the Egyptians were killed by that same sea. Difference between faith and opinion. They both did the same thing, but one of them by faith, the other by opinion. So, now, they get to Mount Sinai. God gives the law. Moses is now, here's this great nation that was promised to Abraham. Here it is. And they're not just a bunch of people. Now what do they have from Sinai?
10 Commandments.
Yeah, they've got a structure, kind of a legal structure. And not just the 10 Commandments, but all the many other laws that were put in place to structure that society. A lot of those rules are, how do I get along with each other? I got 1 million people here. How do we get along with each other? Because, haven't y'all noticed that when people get involved, there can be conflicts, right? So we need some kind of structure of how this thing is going to work. Not only those kinds of, but a judgeship, right? A legal, what do they call, judiciary is established. So over and over and over, what God is doing, he has formed this nation, and now he is putting an underpinning around this nation that will hopefully, if they'll only do what he says, keep it intact. Why does this nation need to stay intact? Promise to Abraham, the third promise, right? A little bit later we'll see that they get the nation that he promised. So here's the people, the nation, the land that he promised, the land of Canaan. And then that third promise, you need to keep this all together, because that third promise, through this nation comes the Messiah. So they get to sign, and what do the people do? Instead of listening to God, or waiting for God, what do? They make a golden calf.
We just came up out of the fire.
I don't know how this golden calf got here. We threw our earrings, all of our gold into this big fire, and poof. And because of the repeated obstinance of this generation, kind of what was their punishment?
The older generation died.
They're gonna die in the wilderness. Their kids will enter into the rest, but you're going to die here, and I'm going to make it to where you will last as long as possible. You won't get tired. Your shoes won't wear. Your clothes won't wear out. Right? About how long of a journey was that? Would you think that would be from Egypt over to Canaan? Everybody put on their geography goggles. Yeah. Huh?
Maybe a month at the speed of the track.
Yeah, if with a big group like that, maybe about a month journey. 40 years. He's basically just waiting for that generation to die off. And their children eventually do enter in. So that's the third part of Moses' life. The first part, he's a somebody in Egypt. The second part, he's a nobody in Midian. But what was God preparing him to be in that third? Huh? So he was what kind of leader? What kind of a leader? In fact, let's see. Let's go to Acts 7. I'm going to start in 22. Verse 22 says, he was trained in the wisdom of Egypt, mighty in word and deed. 23 through 25 is where he's kind of supposing that all this wisdom and mighty word and deed things that he's been doing for 40 years, now, I'm the man, I'm the guy. God is, he had a sense that part of his purpose in life was to lead Israel out of Egypt, to rebel, at least to rebel, right? And that doesn't go like he planned it. Look at 35 through 36. Somebody read that for me. Josh, can you read that for me?
35 to 36.
Mm-hmm.
This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in Egypt, at the Red Sea, and in the wilderness for 40 years.
Ruler and redeemer. Ruler and redeemer. Do you see kind of a kingship in that? Authority, ruler, right? What else do you see there? Ruler and deliverer, redeemer, right? Huh? Well, we know from Deuteronomy 34, definitely a prophet, right? Definitely a prophet. Spending time with God, we already said it, will make you start to take on the characteristics of God. If you're truly spending time with God, listening to Him, letting Him speak to you, you will start to take on the characteristics. Do you see a characteristic of God? Ruler, Redeemer, Christ being prophet, spokesman for God. So Moses is becoming more and more like God. And what do we know from a passage, I believe in, is it Numbers? I didn't write it down, but I believe it's in Numbers. What is he called? Not just meek, but what?
Most humble man of their religion.
Yeah, the meekest man who ever lived. Whoever lived. Right? The meek, not of his generation, but ever. Do you see a quandary there? I'm supposed to be ruler, redeemer, and prophet, and I'm meek? How can you be meek and a ruler, redeemer, and prophet?
Well, meekness is strength under control.
Did you hear what she said? Meekness is strength. At the foundation of meekness, we start with strength. But then she used another word. It's under what? Control. So the Greeks, when they talked about meekness, and we tend to think of meekness as namby-pamby, milquetoast, kind of weak. But when the Greeks talked about meekness, they talked about medicine. So if you take a drug and you use it in an uncontrolled fashion, bad things are going to happen to you. But if you dose out that in a controlled fashion, it can heal you, right? The healing comes from the power of the drug combined with the controlled dosage. Another thing that they would talk about was a horse under a bridle. Very strong animal. Very strong animal. But you put a bridle on it, and you can do what? Let's go left, let's go right, let's stop, right? Let's go. You can control it. So when you think meekness, don't think weakness. Think strength under control, and that seems to be what Moses was really good at. People want strength in their leaders. Would you agree with that? But they want more. What else do they want? Yeah, I really don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. Right? They want somebody who cares for you, who has my best interests at heart, not their own. I don't want a leader to be aggrandizing themselves, making themselves bigger. I want them to help the people, right? Right? Create a rising sea that all boats rise in, right? What else? Small. You want to be kind of wise and small.
Well, he had to put his total self aside.
Yeah.
And let God work through him.
In fact, he literally did that. He asked God, he said he had to put himself aside and it was all for the benefit of the people. He literally did that whenever God was so angry at the people. He said, okay, Moses, can you get out of the way? Because I'm about to destroy this whole nation, and I'm going to create a new nation from your children. Moses' children, right? Moses' family now is going to create a new nation. I'm going to start over. God sometimes gets in the starting over business. He did that in Noah's day, and now he's about to do that in Moses' day. I'm going to keep my promise, but let's start over. And what was Moses' response to that?
You didn't bring him out here.
Yeah.
Bring him out.
Moses is telling God, here's how I understood the plan, God. You're supposed to bring the people out here to get them to Canaan, to get them to rest, and this is the people that was brought out here. And it seems to me that they'll be like a byword. If they're all destroyed, they're brought out here, and people will start going, hey, I told you so. They were going to go out in that desert and just die. And now they've done it. And there's another time where he says, what does he say? Instead of destroying the people, do what? Take it out on me. Do me. Let them off and do me. Oh my goodness. Who is that a perfect picture of? Maybe not a picture, but a shadow of.
Jesus.
Oh, that's Jesus. Do me. Do me. There was a scroll up in heaven. And the question was asked, who is worthy to open the scroll? And the one that was on the throne stood up. And an angel said, behold the Lion of Judah, the King, the Redeemer, the Prophet, the Priest. Behold the Lion of Judah. And John turns, and what does he see? A lamb that looked like it had been slain. That's Jesus. That's a picture of Jesus saying, let me take the punishment of the people. Give them another chance. So, we've gone through 3 phases of Moses' life. God was preparing him to be a leader, but a leader not in the mold of a military man, but in the mold of a what? What had he been for the previous 40 years? In the mold of a shepherd. God seems to really like shepherds. That's a theme that is just replete in Scripture. Moses, David, Jesus, I'm the good shepherd. When he asked men to be leaders in the church, be shepherds of the flock over which God has made you overseers. Be a shepherd. God seems to like shepherds, the way that they lead. So I'm going to ask you to write on your piece of paper two character traits of Moses. We don't have much time. I'm going to give you probably about 2 minutes to do that. And then we can share a couple of those. Okay, who's got a really good one? No pressure. Who's got one you like that you want to share with us? Yes, ma'am. Miss Jan.
Moses could work miracles. Like he turned his staff into a snake was a miracle. And another one was he had water come out of a rock.
Right.
So he was blessed by the Lord to be able to work miracles.
Good. Okay, so he was willing to be a vessel for the Lord, right? To kind of a channel for God to work through. What else? Yes, ma'am?
He didn't let the ridicule of the people stop him.
Stop him.
He kept,
Yeah.
let's get back to what we're supposed
Yeah,
to
he
do.
got. That third season of his life is pretty much just a record of people giving him grief, right? And he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. He keeps going. What else? Obedient, good. He was obedient because he was faithful, right? He had that relationship with God, and then he acted on it, right? He did the Passover, right? He didn't just go, "Hey, that's a great idea." He did it, right? He led the people in obeying God.
He was remembered.
He was remembered? What do you mean?
He had a lasting legacy that extended beyond his life.
Definitely.
People mourned him for some time and looked back and remembered how great a leader he was.
Mm-hmm. What else? Yes, sir?
He was bold.
Would you say he was bold? Right?
How could you stand up to God the way he stood up to God and said, "No, God, don't do that"?
Terry's saying, how could you stand up? God makes a decision and you go, "Let me get down on my knees before you, bow before you, and can I ask you to come up with a different plan than the one you've already come up with God?" The only thing I can figure is that, because he started the opposite of bold, right? I can't do that. I'm not your guy. I don't have the equipment. Nobody's going to follow me. That's where this journey started of this last season of his life. But God asked him to do what? Go before the greatest ruler of the world at the time and make just a radical, unthinkable request. Let your slave population go. Right? And I think God had invested in him, or at least convinced him, speaking about it is okay, right?
I think there's another thing.
What's that?
You've got people that they're not that bold until they're with their friend. And Moses became closer and closer to God, to where he felt like he could talk to him that way.
So if you didn't hear what Terry said, Moses is spending time with God, spending time. Are you willing to say things maybe to your wife or your husband that you wouldn't say to just any Joe Blow on the street, or even people that you go to church with, or people at the school that you attend, or people at your job? You have an intimate relationship. And what should you have with that other person that helps you to kind of be bold in what you say to them? Trust. There's nothing I can say. If I'm sincere in it, if I'm humble about it, if I'm seem to be constructive in what I'm saying, there should be nothing that I should say that makes me think I'm going to lose my love. I think Moses had that kind of boldness, not only to act, but also boldness about God. He was bold about his relationship with God. Very good, Terry. Okay, I'm going to share a couple with you. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of other good ones. Here are the two that came to my mind. He led. His talent seemed to be leading. Statesman, prophet, ruler, redeemer, on and on and on. He was a leader. And the second one I have, he was a feeder. He fed people. Now, literally, right? God can give these people something to eat, manna, the doves, give them something to drink, water, right? They're in a desert place where you don't have a bunch of livestock, a bunch of water running freely. You have to find a spring, go tens of 20s, 30s, hundreds of miles to find the next spring. Feed this great nation out here in this desert. He led the people and he fed the people. What does that look like? That's a shepherd right there, right? Leading and feeding. The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me to lie down by still waters, leads me by still waters and makes me to lie down in green pastures. Leading and feeding. And as Terry just alluded to, and we've talked about, this was God in him. He cared for the people. The people were of primary importance. That was his first thing in his mind was the people, the people, the people. And the people were important to Moses because the people were important to God and his plan. Remember we said Moses wanted to be a part of that story. He didn't want to be a part of the Pharaoh story. He wanted to be a part of the Israelite story. So, we get to the end of Moses' life and he goes into Canaan and everything's fine, right? No. So, he had made mistakes along the way and God said, because of those mistakes you made along the way, you're going to get to see Canaan from the top of a hill, but you can't go in. There's somebody else that's going to take the next step. Your work here is done, right? And Moses was quite effective in this 40-year period of getting a generation ready to go take the land, right? Poor Moses. All this work, and he doesn't enter the land. Fast forward about 1,000 years. Jesus, with 3 of his disciples, standing atop a mountain in Judea. 2 people come and join him on that mountain. Moses finally made it to Canaan on that day. And it was a greater day than any Israelite had ever seen in Canaan. Because why? Moses wanted to be a part of the story of Christ. And that day, he stood in Canaan and talked with Christ about the suffering that Christ was about to undergo. He wasn't just a part of that story. On that day, he was fully engaged in the story and face to face with the story. Tomorrow we'll talk about, what do you think? Who do you think tomorrow we'll talk about?
Josiah.
Oh, that's Thursday, I think. Isn't it Thursday?
The other one's Job.
Job is Thursday.
Is Job Thursday? Okay, tomorrow. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. Jan, what do we talk about on Thursday? Okay, tomorrow is Josiah, and then we'll do Job. Yeah, because wisdom is later. Okay, then we'll do Job, and then I won't tell you what we'll do on Friday. You'll be surprised. Thank y'all all very much.